Hey guys, welcome back to more HOA Ripestories. In this Reddit video, a tyrannical HOA president made the mistake of trespassing on a marine's property and demanding he hand over his weapons. He thought he could use fake bylaws and intimidation to crush me, but he was wrong. Instead of a lawsuit, I used his own aggression against him. Let's dive right into the video. But the first one is titled, "Try to sneak a foreclosure? Lose my business and everyone else's," posted on r/pettyrevenge. So for some background information, for anyone who has ever served on an HOA board, you know that most of the violations, accounting and general management of an HOA, especially with a neighborhood of the size I run, is handled by a property management company. This is mainly because it would be too expensive and biased to have someone who lives in the community handle all of these duties alone. A dirty little secret of these companies, however, that many of these companies will make their prices cheaper by secretly passing fining policies onto homeowners that the board has no control over. Hence today's story. So for the main story, about a month ago, we were conducting a regular HOA meeting, and we've been having them fairly often to keep our board, management company rep, and homeowners in sync since I've been hearing complaints of bad behavior from the management company. This particular meeting, however, things almost got out of control. As soon as we finished all of our checklist items, we asked homeowners about any questions. A couple stood up and I saw the man holding a paper with a shaking hand, which I quickly learned was due to his anger. Over the next 10 minutes, he explained how he was here to plead his case for the board not to foreclose on his house, especially since he had been making payments on a large debt for a very long time. Without going into too many details, the discussion got extremely heated because our management company had told us not to get involved since this homeowner had already been involved with our lawyers. After lots of arguing, the meeting was finally over. I left totally confused because I knew that the homeowner was in good standing, and if he was willing to pay, which the records showed he had called to do so, why couldn't he? I had been told by my property manager to not take any action, and I decided to call BS. I called the legal firm representing the board, which I was told to not do, even though they represent us. After talking with the firm for an hour, I found out that the management company had not allowed this homeowner to pay his fines and dues because of a petty procedural technicality, and that instead they were slapping fines on him like there was no tomorrow. I quickly told the lawyer to offer to settle his balance with no fines, and the issue was resolved the next day. Now for the revenge part, so I spent more time looking into our management company and found out that they would underbid management contract costs and supplement them by adding in their own fines onto homeowner collections without the board's approval. This is a technicality in the fining process, and while it's not illegal, it is highly unethical and disputable because it encourages the management company to fine and escalate non-issues since to make more money. I honestly felt horrendous because I had no idea about all of this because it's a one-line clause in the contract. I had also received a call from our community manager urging us to stop waiving fines since it sets a bad example. That one really sent me over the edge. Livid with this phone call and new knowledge about fines, I found a new management company and terminated our contract immediately. In addition, I believe I found a loophole where all of the charges unfairly pressed against homeowners will not be recouped by the company, and the HOA cannot be liable for them since they are passed through. During the issue with the property investment company, see other post, I met about a dozen other HOA board members in my area and discovered about 6 of them are using the same company and even community manager. I urged them to look into the same issues and they soon discovered the horrors for themselves. It sounds like all of them will be terminating their contracts too. One of the other association presidents actually knows state council for HOA rules, and they are now working with them to make this practice illegal. If it passes, this entire company would go under. While I'm not exactly holding my breath, I'm certainly following the legal proceedings closely and have even offered to testify before a committee why this rule is needed. It sounds like deliberations begin in January. As for the community manager, the person helping our community, they have lost over half of their contracts and their manager came begging for me to stay. They even offered to stop the fining policy in the most corporate talk way possible, where they basically gave themselves plausible deniability if they do it again. I told him that his property manager deserved what she had coming to her and that their policies were stone cold terrible. He tried to reply, but I just hung up. I was too angry for all of this. Watch these management companies closely. They are almost all seriously snakes in the grass, waiting to screw over board members and community members. And yeah guys, if you still enjoy these HOA stories, please don't forget to like the video and maybe even post a comment if you truly wanna help me with the algorithm. Thank you so much. The next one is titled, HOA tries to confiscate my guns. But I am a Marine and not part of the HOA. So for some background first, I am a Marine and I served many years as a sergeant. I got out about 6 years ago, spent most of my time with an artillery unit, which is why I wear hearing aids now and my right knee sounds like bubble wrap when I climb stairs. When I got out, I wanted peace and quiet, no neighbors blasting music and no HOAs telling me what color I could paint my mailbox, just me and some land where I could actually breathe. And here, I found the perfect spot about 6 years ago, 10 acres of old farmland, mostly wooded, with a small creek running through the back corner. The property had been in the same family since the 50s, complete with a beat-up farmhouse that needed work but it had good bones. The best part though, it was zoned rural residential, which meant I could do pretty much whatever I wanted within reason. Hunt, have chickens, park my truck on the lawn if I felt like it, just freedom. Now here's where it gets important for you. My property sits adjacent to a newer subdivision called Small Town Dictator Estates. They started building it about 8 years ago, carved up what used to be farmland into quarter-acre lots with cookie-cutter houses. Each one has the same 3 paint schemes, same landscaping, same mailboxes, you know the type, and yeah, they got an HOA, a very aggressive HOA. When I bought my place, the realtor made absolutely certain that I understood that my property was not part of the HOA. Because my land itself predated their subdivision by decades, it was an old farmstead from the 50s, there's a clear boundary marked by an old stone fence that's been there since before I was born, plus surveyor stakes from when I had the property lines confirmed before closing. My driveway does share the first 100 feet with their access road because of an easement from way back, but that's it. Legally, they had zero authority over my property and I kept to myself for the first few years. Fixed up the house, cleared some trails, did my thing. I'm not what you would call a gun nut or anything, but I do have a collection. Couple of hunting rifles, a shotgun, a few handguns, and yeah, a few semi-automatic rifles that I bought legally and keep locked in a proper safe. I'm meticulous about it. 20 years in the military teaches you to respect firearms and follow protocols. Everything was purchased legally, stored properly, and I'd never given anyone reason to worry. The trouble started about 18 months ago when the HOA got a new president. I will just call him the president because I'm trying to keep this somewhat anonymous. This guy is the worst kind of middle management type who never did anything real in his life, but loves wielding whatever tiny bit of power he can get. I had seen him around, always driving through the neighborhood in his golf cart with a clipboard looking for violations. Someone's trash can out 6 hours too long, a lawn that is a quarter inch too high, Christmas lights still up on January 2nd, that kind of petty tyrant, you know. The president apparently decided my property was an eyesore. See, I don't really do manicured lawns, I've got native grass, some wildflowers, areas where I just let it go natural, and my farmhouse is old but maintained, just not trendy. It's not falling apart, it's not covered in trash, it is just lived in. Apparently, this offended his delicate sensibilities. The first letter came in spring. It informed me that I was in violation of Small Town Dictator Estates community standards for so-called unkept landscaping and non-conforming exterior aesthetics. They demanded that I bring my property into compliance within 30 days, else I would face fines. I actually laughed at them, then I wrote back very politely with a copy of my deed showing that my property was not part of their HOA and they had no authority over me. I thought that would be the end of it, but it was not the end. 2 weeks later there was another letter. This one claimed that because my driveway shared their access road, I was somehow benefiting from HOA infrastructure and was therefore subject to their rules. I wrote back again, this time with a copy of the easement agreement showing that the access road was not HOA property, but a shared easement that existed before their subdivision. I even included a highlighted portion explaining that the easement holders were not subject to HOA oversight. The president didn't like being corrected. The next letter threatened legal action for so-called ongoing violations, and by this point I was seriously getting annoyed. So I had a real estate attorney send them a letter explaining very clearly that they had no jurisdiction over my property and that further harassment could be considered actionable. Cost me $300, but it was worth it. Well, that is when things escalated. I came home from a VA appointment one afternoon to find the president and 3 other HOA board members standing in my driveway. Not near it, in it, on my property. The HOA president was taking pictures of my house with his phone. I got out of my truck and asked what they thought they were doing here. The president got this smug look and said they were conducting a safety inspection of properties adjacent to the community. I told them they were just trespassing and needed to leave immediately. That is when one of them, some lady who introduced herself as the safety committee chairperson, pointed at my gun safe visible through my garage window and said, "Is that a gun safe?" I said, "Yeah, that's a gun safe and it's none of your business." She then got this shocked look and said they had serious concerns about weapons being stored so close to a family neighborhood. The president chimed in that they had recently passed a new bylaw prohibiting military-grade weapons in arsenals within 500 feet of HOA property lines. I told them again that I was not part of their HOA and that they were trespassing and that they needed to leave before I called the sheriff. They left, but not before the president said, "We will see about that." I immediately went inside and checked my security camera footage. And sure enough, I had them clearly trespassing, photographing my property, and one of them actually tried to look through my garage window. I saved all of it. 3 days later, 2 sheriff deputies showed up at my door. They were polite, almost apologetic, and said they had received a report of illegal weapons being stockpiled at my address and needed to investigate. I asked who made the report. They said it came from the HOA, claiming I was threatening the neighborhood with military assault weapons. Now, I know my rights and I also know how to handle law enforcement respectfully. I invited them in and showed them my safe and everything. The senior deputy was actually a veteran himself, recognized some of my unit photos on the wall, and he checked everything and confirmed this was all legal and properly stored. Before they left, he told me off the record that the HOA president had called the sheriff's office 3 times, insisting they needed to raid the compound next door and confiscate my so-called illegal arsenal. The deputy said he had filed a report noting that the complaint was unfounded and warned the president about making further false reports, and he also suggested I might want to document everything in case they tried again, and I thought maybe that would be the end of it. Surely they would back off after the sheriff confirmed that I was not doing anything wrong, right? Nope. A week later, I got a certified letter from the HOA. This one was something else. It informed me that at an emergency HOA meeting, they had voted to ban all firearms within the small-town dictator estate's community boundaries. The letter went on to claim that recent legal review had determined my property was actually part of the original HOA charter, and I had 30 days to comply with all regulations, including immediate removal or surrender of all firearms to local law enforcement. The letter also included a fine schedule, $500 for the landscaping violation and $1,000 for the weapons violation, and it stated that if I did not comply, they would place a lien on my property. And yeah, I was furious. This was not just harassment anymore, they were outright lying, making false legal claims and threatening my property, so I called my attorney immediately. My attorney read the letter and basically said this was one of the most ridiculous things he had ever seen. He explained that HOAs cannot just claim property that is not theirs, and they cannot pass bylaws that violate constitutional rights, and they certainly cannot just ban legal firearms on property they don't even control. He drafted a response threatening to sue them for harassment, defamation, and attempted extortion if they didn't cease immediately. But here's the thing, I'd been in the military long enough to know that sometimes the best defense is a good offense, and I'd had enough of being polite while these people tried to bully me off my own land. So I started doing some research. I pulled up the county zoning maps, looked into the regulations for my rural residential zone, and checked what I could and couldn't do on my property, and that is when I found it. My property was zoned in a way that allowed recreational use, including sport shooting on parcels of 10 acres or more with proper safety measures. The county had specific regulations about backstops, distances from property lines, and safety protocols, but there was nothing prohibiting it. In fact, the county even had a form for notifying them of intent to establish a private shooting range for personal use. I sat there staring at my computer screen and started smiling. See, the HOA kept insisting I was part of their community, they kept claiming jurisdiction over my property, and they wanted to tell me that I could not have guns on my own land. And well, if they wanted to keep pushing, I was gonna exercise my rights on my property in the most legal, most visible, and most annoying way possible. I spent the next 2 weeks doing it right, and I mean absolutely by the book. This was not gonna be some half-done backyard setup. I contacted the county planning department and filed all the proper paperwork for establishing a private recreational shooting facility. There were forms for land use notification, environmental impact assessments for my property size, and safety compliance documentation. I hired a licensed surveyor to come out and mark my exact property lines with professional-grade stakes and markers. It cost me $800, but I wanted zero ambiguity about where my property ended and where that HOA thought their authority began. The surveyor actually found that my property extended about 15 feet further towards the subdivision than my original markers even showed. It turns out the old stone fence was not quite on the boundary. Good to know. Then I brought in a contractor who specialized in shooting range construction. Not just any contractor though, but a guy who had built ranges for law enforcement agencies and private clubs, and he came highly recommended by the sheriff's department. We walked my property together and I explained exactly what I wanted. He designed a proper setup with a 25-yard pistol range and a 100-yard rifle range. The pistol range had 6 shooting stations with concrete pads and permanent benches. The rifle range had 4 stations with adjustable bench rests. Both had professional-grade backstops built to capture rounds safely. We are talking engineered berms with proper compaction drainage systems to prevent erosion and ballistic rubber curtains behind the target areas. The safety measures went way beyond what the county actually required. We installed range flags that would be visible from the access road, showing when the range was hot. We even put up warning signs at the property boundaries, and we even included a safety briefing station with posted rules at the entrance to the range area. But the key detail? My property slopes downwards away from the HOA subdivision, dropping about 20 feet over the length of my land. The old stone fence boundary sits up on the high ground. With the professional backstop we built positioned in the natural low area, every round would be safely contained on my property with multiple layers of protection. The contractor did a full safety assessment, including sidelines and ricochet angles, and documented that it exceeded county requirements by a significant margin. I positioned the range along the boundary line closest to the HOA development, and now I had other spots on my property that might have been slightly better from a pure shooting perspective, but there's a nice clear area near the back of my land with a natural landslide that would have made an excellent backstop. But you know what? That would not have made the point I wanted to make. The spot I chose was visible from at least a dozen HOA houses, not directly in their yards, but visible enough that they would see the construction, see the activity, and hear everything clearly. And it was completely legal. The county's setback requirement said that I needed to be at least 100 feet from the property line for the shooting stations, and I put them at 150. The backstops could be at 50 feet, and I put them at 75. I submitted my final plans to the county with a 3-ring binder of documentation, site plans, safety assessments, photos of the existing property, engineered drawings of the backstops, drainage plans, everything. I wanted this bulletproof, and if you'll pardon the expression. The county sent an inspector out about a week later. He was thorough, walked every inch of where the range would be built, checked the sidelines, measured distances. He actually complimented the design, said it was better than some commercial ranges he had seen, and he confirmed everything met or exceeded safety requirements and approved the permit. I got my approval in writing, properly stamped and signed, and the county told me there had been some calls from HOA residents trying to oppose it, but since my property met all the requirements and the callers were not abutters with legal standing, their complaints did not matter. I made 6 copies of that approval, 1 for my files, 1 for my attorney, and kept the rest just in case. When you're dealing with people who lie about legal jurisdiction, you keep backups of everything, and then I started construction. I had dump trucks bringing in gravel for the access road and shooting platforms, an excavator digging the berms and grading the drainage, contractors building the frames for the target stands, and the work took about 3 weeks with a full crew. I made sure to schedule the noisiest work during permitted hours, excavator running at 8 AM on weekdays, dump trucks backing up with those beeping alarms, concrete mixers pouring the shooting platforms. It was all legal, all permitted, and all very audible across the subdivision. The whole time I could see HOA residents stopping their cars on the access road to watch. Some of them took pictures and a few shouted questions about what I was building, and I stayed friendly with them. I waved at everyone. Told anyone who asked that I was building a recreational shooting facility fully permitted by the county, and you should have seen their faces. The president showed up the day we were installing the main backstop. We had brought in a crane to set the large ballistic panels, which was admittedly dramatic. He pulled up in his golf cart, clipboard in hand like always, practically vibrating with rage. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" he demanded. I smiled very politely. "Well, I'm building a private shooting range fully permitted by the county." His face went red. "This is a residential neighborhood, you cannot just build a gun range." "Rural residential zoning." I corrected him, and actually, I can. I got the permits right here if you would like to see them. He sputtered something about HOA regulations, and I reminded him again that I was not in his HOA, never had been, never would be, and I'd explained this multiple times in writing with legal documentation already. "This is insane," he shouted. "You're doing this to spite us." I shrugged. "Well, you folks kept insisting that my property was part of your HOA. You kept claiming you had authority over what I could do on my own land, kept threatening to confiscate my legally owned property. I'm here just exercising my legal rights on my legal property. If you left me alone like I asked, we wouldn't be having this conversation." He said he would call the sheriff. I said that was fine, they had my number, all my permits were in order, and he did call the sheriff. Same 2 deputies came out, the veteran and his partner. They pulled up, looked at the construction, looked at my posted permits, and just shook their heads. The senior deputy checked my documentation, walked aside, checked the safety measures, and nodded, told the president this was legal, the permits were in order, and the safety measures exceeded requirements. The president tried to argue about the noise. The deputy cut him off. "Sir, this is the 4th time you've called us out here. Every time we found that the property owner is operating legally. If you keep making frivolous complaints, you could be charged with misuse of emergency services. Do you understand?" The president went pale, nodded, and left without another word. I finished the range in 3 weeks total, professional grade setup, safe and completely legal. And yeah, then I started using it. Every Saturday morning, 9 AM like clockwork, not early enough to violate noise ordinances or be unreasonable, but early enough that I knew the HOA folks would hear about it. The sound of gunfire carries in the morning air, especially over a subdivision with its little quarter-acre lots and no real barriers. That first Saturday I took my time, started with some handgun practice, then moved on to the rifle range, sighted in one of my hunting rifles, and spent about 2 hours total. All completely legal, all safe, with proper hearing protection, and every safety protocol followed. However, the sound of gunfire echoing over the HOA neighborhood every Saturday morning clearly bothered them immensely. The complaint letter started immediately. I got one from the HOA demanding I cease disturbing the peace, and I wrote back with a copy of the county noise ordinance showing that recreational shooting during daylight hours on properly zoned property was explicitly allowed. I got letters from individual residents claiming I was terrorizing them, and I ignored those too. The president tried to get the county to revoke my permit, and the county inspector came out again, confirmed I was operating safely and within regulations, and told the president to stop wasting their time. But here's where it gets even better. Remember how I mentioned I'm a veteran? Well, I still have a lot of buddies from my old unit who live within an hour's drive, and when I mentioned I'd built a private range, they were very interested. So I started inviting them over. Just a few guys at a time, all veterans, all legal gun owners, and we had spent Saturday mornings shooting, catching up, having coffee. It became a regular thing. 4 or 5 vets, perfectly legal on my property, exercising our rights. The sound of multiple people shooting, even in a controlled, safe manner, was apparently even more disturbing to the HOA than me shooting alone, and the complaints intensified. I got threats of lawsuits. I got more visits from the sheriff, who by this point were just annoyed with the HOA for wasting their time. Then I had my stroke of genius. There's a veteran organization in the county that does outreach and support programs, and I contacted them and offered my range for training purposes free of charge, and they were thrilled. They started running basic firearm safety courses for veterans, properly licensed and insured on Saturday mornings, and suddenly my private range was a community resource. The county supervisor even showed up one day to take some photos and thank me for supporting veteran services. The HOA lost their minds. The president tried to organize a protest. 3 people showed up. Meanwhile, the local paper ran a feel-good story about veterans helping veterans with a photo of me and my buddies at the range. The president tried one more time to get me. He filed a complaint with the county claiming my range was a commercial operation that violated residential zoning. The county investigated, confirmed I wasn't charging anyone anything, and that it was just recreational use as permitted, and dismissed the complaint. The zoning officer apparently told the president, and I quote from the letter I received, to stop harassing a law-abiding property owner who is operating within his legal rights. But then came the final blow to the HOA's campaign. The local sheriff department asked if they could use my range for officer training. It's apparently hard to find good shooting facilities in the county, and mine met their standards. I said absolutely free of charge, and now every other week sheriff's deputies train at my range. The same sheriff's department the HOA kept calling to complain about me, and the irony was not lost on anyone. The harassment stopped after that. I still get the occasional dirty look from HOA residents when I'm driving through the shared access road, but nobody bothered me anymore. The president actually moved out of the neighborhood about 6 months ago. By the way, the sheriff's department still uses my range, and every Saturday morning the sound of gunfire echoes over small-town dictator estates, a reminder that they don't control me or my property. Some people have asked me if I feel bad about annoying the neighbors, and honestly, not really. I tried to handle this politely. I provided documentation showing I was not part of their HOA, and I had lawyers explain it to them. They chose to escalate to trespass, to make false reports, and try to intimidate me into giving up my legal rights, and I did not break any laws, I didn't do anything unsafe, and I didn't violate anyone's actual rights. I just exercised my own rights on my own property in a way that happened to be very visible and audible to the people who had been trying to bully me. The HOA, meanwhile, has been dealing with falling property values because apparently nobody wants to live in a neighborhood that's become locally famous for trying to bully a veteran over his legal gun collection. Several houses have been on the market for months. I've also heard current residents complaining that the HOA fees keep going up while they cannot attract new buyers. My property, my rights, my range, end of story. And the next one is a malicious compliance story, which is titled, "Okay, I will stay on camera." So years ago, before Sports Authority went out of business, I worked there as the hardline/receiving manager of one of their stores. Terrible company, I'm glad they went out. They were positively obsessed with the possibility of employee theft. Understandable, I know, but don't be such poopheads and you might lower your chances. Unloading a truck at the store for some bizarre reason required someone to stand on the dock plate while the serial number was called in, never understood why. Then one day, the guy assisting me with the unload couldn't find the phone number to call in the serial number where it was written on the desk for some reason. I stepped off the dock plate, not even fully sure I stepped off camera, but stepped off the dock plate to yell at him where it was. Location Ops Manager, glorified head cashier, gives me a warning I guess. I think her name was Robin, and she essentially had battered wife syndrome with her job. Okay, I would stand on the dock plate, except I have ADD, get bored easily, and have a penchant for acting inappropriately in situations. Cue up me dancing on the dock plate and riding an imaginary horse while the person calls in the serial number. Did I mention I suck at dancing? Ops Manager decides I'm not taking this with all the serious she can conjure up and reports me to District Loss Prevention Manager, shows him tape of me dancing in the dock plates and asks him what they are gonna do about it. It got back to that his response was, nothing, he's doing exactly what we told him to do. And yeah guys, thank you for watching, I will see you again tomorrow.